Welcome to Philosophy 208, Studies Section 1. The interconnection between philosophy, language, and communication. Introduction. As a student of philosophy, you may likely be wondering what the connection could be between philosophy, language, and communication. Of course, language and communication are conceptual relatives. One is almost impossible without the other. For instance, we all seem to know that one of the most significant functions of language is to facilitate communication and interpersonal relationship in the society. Thus, without language and communication, even the very basis of human society is destabilized. In this lecture, we want to demonstrate the relationship that philosophy as a human endeavor has with language, a unique human achievement in the generation of communication. Learning outcomes for Studies Section 1. When you have studied this section, you should be able to explain the term philosophy, highlight the relationship existing between the art of philosophizing and living in the society, examine the role of human communication in philosophizing and in the society. Philosophy. Philosophy is derived from the Greek word philosophia, which translates as the love of wisdom. As the love of wisdom, philosophy provides deep insight into the human condition. These insights that philosophy provides serve as guide to actions in a world filled with ups and downs. The wisdom that philosophy searches for is a comprehensive set of beliefs and ideas that acts as a general vision or perspective about the following: the universe, a person's place in the universe, and the possible goals and objectives a person may productively pursue in the universe. Essentially, therefore, philosophy seeks to promote human understanding, but that understanding is not for understanding's sake. Philosophy helps human beings to understand the universe and the human condition, and in turn, that understanding is brought to bear on human actions. In other words, an action becomes a meaningful one to the extent that it results from an adequate understanding of the human condition, leading to actions that enable man to cope with the uncertainties of the universe and live a meaningful life. The survival of the human person is therefore directly tied to the idea of human understanding. Language and communication are equally essential for human survival in the sense that both are channels for promoting human understanding. What is language? Definition of language. Language, simply defined, is a system of signs and symbols that stand for something external to the signs, symbols, and facilitate verbal exchange among humans. It is automatically a complex system of communication through those signs and symbols. This system of communication has several dimensions that enable the communication process. Language could be seen as available sound, which includes phonetics, the study of speech production, and of the total resources of sound available for speech communication as organized sound. Phonology, the study of the pattern of speech sound used in particular languages, or as grammar, the study of the signs and the internal relationship between them. Language could also refer either to the spoken or the written medium as text or conversation. Human language becomes essential to the extent that it facilitates, either as written or spoken signs and symbols, the interaction among humans and between humans and their environment. The communication that language enables is a process that involves the definition and transference of meaning or thought content among people who have a history of communicative commonality. This process involves a sender, a message, and a receiver who gives a feedback through a successful decoding of the meaning in the message. How does philosophy relate to language? Philosophy seeks to promote human understanding about the universe, and this can only be conveyed through language. There are several models and theories that have been proposed explaining adequately this communication process. The most common is called the transmission model, TM. This standard view of communication sees it as a means of sending and receiving information. In other words, a message is sent from a sender through a particular channel to a receiver. Following the critique of this standard model, other models like the sender message channel, receiver model SMCR, the transactional model, and the co-regulation model were presented to better elaborate the essence of human communication. Whatever model is used, the significant thing in language as communication is the meaning that is transferred and the understanding that is fostered. Communication in the first place is the attempt to interact with nature in the sense of understanding those aspects of nature that are conducive to human survival and those aspects that are dangerous. In the second place, communication is also crucial to cooperation and solidarity among human beings, especially if they are to adequately come to terms with the complexity of the universe. It becomes obvious so far that philosophy, language, and communication are interconnected to facilitate human understanding and, in the final analysis, human survival. Philosophy, as we have argued, is primarily concerned with the construction of worldview and the critical investigation of those ideas, beliefs, and values that go into the formulation of that worldview. In other words, philosophy is concerned ultimately with the attempt to understand the universe and the place of man in it. Human communication through language enables human understanding through the transmission of the knowledge we derive from this reflection to others. We have been talking about human understanding as if it is a concept that is unproblematic. Let us next consider this concept that is so crucial to philosophy and language as communication. In your own words, explain the significance of language in the society. We use language to inform the people around us of what we feel, what we desire, and question to enable us understand the world around us. The idea of human understanding. The urge to understand anything seems almost natural for all humans. We make every attempt to come to terms with the environment around by searching for a sense of them that goes beyond just seeking for information or knowledge. Manson, 2003, 1. There are two significant questions that could facilitate our understanding of the concept of understanding. These questions are: what are those things that we seek to understand? How do we go about understanding these things? In other words, the best way to go about tackling the meaning of understanding is to first have an idea of those things we attempt to understand, and then go on to examine how we use the word in ordinary language. Areas and problems of human understanding. There are several things that keep us wandering in life. There are also several things we assume to understand, but later realize that we actually don't. There are many instances when we make statements like, "I thought I understood so and so, but I really don't." Thus, the idea of understanding has bearing on so many areas of our lives. Let's examine some of these areas briefly. A. Understanding oneself. The first most significant and most intimate subject of understanding is oneself. I am seriously interested in understanding myself, my desires, attitudes, aspirations, being, and so on. Such self-understanding is not restricted to a set of information about me, that I am a man, a lecturer, 30 years old, an orphan, a distance learner, etc. It is a critical subject because there are many times we find ourselves doing things that we uncritically see as not being in our character. In other words, there are many times when we surprise ourselves because we did things we never thought we are capable of, either negative or positive. What other people say about me may be very important, but does not form a part of self-understanding. B. Understanding other people. Following from the above, another crucial subject for understanding that makes the concept a difficult one is understanding other people. This type of understanding is as difficult as self-understanding. It is more so because there are so many things that hang upon an understanding of those whose stories intercept our own. The problem is really that our supposed understanding of others has been subjected to shifting circumstances that fight with our intuition about, say, a particular person. Thus, statements like, she, he was so high in my opinion until. A consequence of understanding other people is that of understanding people in the past. This involves an attempt to understand a person and the person's past motives, intentions, and desires. What makes this dimension of understanding difficult is that what we seek to understand already lies in the past, far away from immediate memory. C. Understanding cultures and societies. We also attempt to understand cultures and societies that are different from ours. There are so many cultural practices and beliefs that would, in the light of our own cultures, appear troubling, laughable, and even barbaric. Yet, these practices may be meaningful in their own light. Understanding these cultures implies an attempt to get into their own light in order to see what they see. D. Understanding religions. This is particularly critical because religion constitutes the cause of most conflicts, especially in the Nigerian state. Remember, for instance, a religious crisis in Nigeria sparked by an insensitive cartoon about Prophet Muhammad. The understanding required by religions is made difficult because religious beliefs, symbols, and artifacts are usually buried under a whole load of religious terms, concepts, rites, symbolism, doctrines, mysteries, rationality, and so on that make explanation superhuman. For instance, it is still a difficult thing for non-initiates to understand the Eucharist and the principle of transubstantiation. E. Understanding the law. The law is another area where people struggle for understanding. This involves the explanation and interpretation of legal codes, principles, terms, and precedents. Ardent followers of the Nigerian political history would remember the legal debate that attended the attempt to interpret the idea of two-thirds majority in the Nigerian House of Assembly in the Second Republic. According to Mason, law shares with personal and social understanding a reading of hidden or lost intentions and meanings, and also a characteristic indeterminacy about correctness, 2003-11. Understanding a law or a legal code requires not only deciding on what constitutes a right interpretation, but also on the criteria for achieving a right interpretation. F. Understanding texts. The same kind of problem that an understanding of law faces could also be faced by the attempt to understand texts. The complexity does not diminish if the text is in a person's language or in another language. So much confusion, for instance, has attended the precise understanding of, say, the Bible. This is so for text because there is an ongoing attempt to arrive at the intention or meaning intended by the author of the text. A particular story like Shakespeare's Hamlet or Achebe's Madman presents a problem of grasping the textual or narrative sense of the work. Again, this rides on the significance that one places on authoritarian intention embedded in the text. There are so many other issues that are the subject of understanding. People attempt to understand nature, mathematics, art, moral values, language, economics, animal behavior, and so on. These various subjects of understanding, it would seem, demand different means of understanding. If this is so, then the question is, how do we understand at all? This takes us to the second question we intend to answer. How do we understand these subjects? The concept of understanding. The Encounter Dictionary sees understanding as follows: the ability to perceive and explain the meaning or the nature of somebody or something, the knowledge of a particular subject, area, or situation, somebody's interpretation of something, or a belief or opinion based on an interpretation of or interference from something, a tolerant recognition of somebody else's nature or situation. This is one way of addressing the meaning of the concept of understanding. The second is to see how we use the term in everyday conversation. The following statement reflects some of the manners in which we use the understanding in ordinary language. 1. We don't understand each other. 2. The behavior of animals is a difficult thing to understand. 3. Have been trying to understand our president's style of leadership. 4. The university authority does not seem to understand the plight of distance learners. 5. She seems to understand her husband. 6. He understands the internet. These various usages of the concept of understanding touches on so many other ideas that may help us in coming to terms with the meaning of understanding. First, the dictionary raises such concepts like knowledge, interpretation, empathy, sympathy, and explanation as possible synonyms for understanding. In other words, for instance, when we understand anything, we are attempting an explanation for it. One understands the weather, say, if one can offer an explanation of its features. On the other hand, if I make a statement like, "It was my understanding that the book is philosophical," I am referring to my interpretation of the book. Understanding becomes empathy in a statement like, "For the above statements 1, 2, and 3 translate understanding as an insight into a situation." Statement 6 considers understanding as the possession of the skills necessary to do something. Manson explains the concept below in terms of models of understanding which grounds our understanding of understanding. Let's consider each. A. Understanding can be seen as a form of visual representation. This is what it means to say, I see that you mean about the guy. This implies that to understand is to have a form of mental picture of the subject of understanding. The immediate problem are, does all understanding require a form of seeing? Isn't it possible that one can see without achieving understanding at all? B. Understanding is also perceived as capacity. To understand is to possess the ability to do something. This comes to mind in a statement like, I understand Igbo, or I understand the computer. If I say I understand Igbo, but could respond intelligently to questions in that language or write intelligently in it, then we can't say I really understand it. However, is it enough that to understand language, for instance, all I must have are linguistic capacities? In a famous thought experiment, John Seeley, an American philosopher, proposes an argument that seeks to prove that the ability to stimulate an intelligent conversation in any language does not really prove that one understands that language. Imagine that I am in a room with a computer program which affords me the opportunity to Chinese characters in response to other people outside the room. Thus, when they ask me a question in Chinese, I am able to manipulate the Chinese characters with the aid of the computer program and respond intelligently. Those outside the room could believe that I understand Chinese, but do I really understand it? And again, just like the case of visual representation, does all understand require a form of capacity? C. Another model of understanding is interpretation. In this sense, to understand anything is to be able to interpret or assume its sense. The problem with this is that the art of interpreting does not rely on the same immediateness that we see in the visual imagery. To interpret suggests rather an intermediate level between being aware of something and understanding it. D. Understanding could also be taken to mean scientific understanding, a form of explanation in a law-like form. One understands the movement of the planet as a result of the explanatory laws that makes it intelligible. To understand anything, therefore, is to understand the rules guiding the behavior of that thing. Like interpretation, this model describes understanding at the cost of directness. In other words, it seems that to understand is first to explain. What then is the relationship between explanation and understanding? E. One could also take understanding to mean knowledge or education. While understanding as knowledge may involve the ability to gather the relevant facts about something or somebody, education requires grasping, seeing the point, making connections, consolidating. Mason, 2003, 31. Educational understanding implies reordering or reappraising what is already known by way of fact rather than the acquisition of new facts. F. One could also appropriate the model of understanding as an intuitive or mystical illumination. To understand in this context is to possess a subjective or personal awareness or insight or intuition of the sense of a thing, a sudden flash of understanding. However, since this model is fundamentally subjective, it makes it difficult to context any claim of understanding. This is because it lacks the objectiveness of knowledge as understanding. G. Similar to the above is the model of understanding as sympathy or empathy. This refers to some subjective capacity to step into the situation of another person. But if understanding is ab initio, taken as an intellectual quality, would such an obviously emotional quality as sympathy qualify? This is apart from the problem of being too subjective. The problem, therefore, is whether any of these concepts subsume the idea of understanding totally. In other words, can we say any of these concepts serve as a sufficient definition of understanding? What seems plausible from the above discussion of the models is that explanation, empathy, interpretation, insight, and knowledge could all be regarded as necessary conditions for achieving understanding of anything. Seeking for a sufficient condition or a general theory of understanding may be too far-fetched. The most that can be done in defining understanding is to see it operationally as a kind of deeper comprehension that shows how the various elements of things hang together. This definition would also participate in the special circumstance of what is to be understood. Summary for Studies Section 1. In this studies section, you have learned that 1. There is a connection that exists between philosophy, language, and communication. We found this connection in the idea of human understanding. In other words, the three concepts are crucial because they enable humans to achieve the understanding not only of their environment but also of fellow human beings. 2. Philosophy is critical in this process because it allows for a critical analysis of our beliefs, ideas, and thought, in fact, our worldviews. A worldview in this context is an attempt to draw a large picture of the nature of the universe, the nature of the human person, the relationship that such a human person can have with the universe, and the kind of goals such a person can pursue in such a universe. 3. To have a worldview is therefore to achieve some form of understanding of the world. On the other hand, language as a system of signs and symbols exists solely for communicative purpose, and communication's purpose is the transference of thought, idea, meaning, and information from one person to another. Its fundamental basis is also to achieve understanding. 4. Since understanding is crucial to human survival, we also examine critically the meaning of understanding through two questions. A. What do we seek to understand? B. How do we achieve understanding? Oneself, other people, other cultures, texts and stories, religions, laws, and so on. We also outlined the meaning of understanding as scientific explanation, as knowledge, as interpretation, as insight, as education, as capacity, as mystical illumination, and as sympathy. This is the end of Studies Section 1. Thanks for listening.